Hello, friends. It is the Sunday before exam number 2 in MS265, and by popular demand, I am bringing you a quick video on data validation. So a couple things about data validation. You should be fairly comfortable with this process going into the exam tomorrow because we covered it in class, plus it was in your reading and a little bit of your homework. But I wanted to make a little something just to jog your memory a little bit and remind you about what data validation in Excel is all about. So the best way to do that, the best way to jump in is just show you an example. So here I've got a little simulated survey in Excel. And today is March 27th. And notice that the first video the first cell that you see here on this simulated survey that we've got says enter today's date. So today is 3/27. And if I put in 3/27/2022, we're good. But if I jump in and I change that to say 3/28/2022, Houston, we have a problem. And the problem is we were supposed to put in today's current date and we did not do that. And because we didn't do that, Excel is doing an automated check and it's saying, hey, this is not the date that you were supposed to enter, and it's giving us an error. So this process of validating the data that's being entered in a cell is called data validation. And the reason we have data validation is to ensure that the data input that we want from our customer or our user is the data that we receive, specifically in the data format and the data type that we want. Now you see this all the time in the world, not even in the business world, just everywhere, right? Try to buy something online. It's going to ask you for a credit card number. If you don't put a valid credit card number in, it's going to validate. It's going to tell you it's wrong. Try to pay something by check online. It's going to ask you for a routing number and a checking account number. And if one of those numbers is not validated, then it's going to give you an error. So ultimately, when you talk about data validation, what you're looking at is a system that verifies that the input that you need is the input that you received, so that the data that you analyze is actually correct. Okay. And there's a lot of different types of data validation. Now, this specific one was a date validation, but there's other validations along the way. So for example, if I jump down to status, notice that it gives me a name here. It says, hey, enter in the status based on what your college level of education is. And here we have freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. So I click sophomore, we're good. But if I were to try to type something else in, say, hey, my status is single, it's going to go, nope, that's not what we were looking for. You have to select something from the list, like so. Now this is called a list validation. So the first one is a date validation. The second one is a list validation. There are several different types of validations you can do, but ultimately what you need to understand is that data validation is a method of restricting the input of a cell in Excel to only the types of data or the types of input that you would like in order to do your data analysis. So that's sort of what data validation is. So now a couple of things about data validation that you want to know. It's built in automatically in Excel, but by default, every cell in Excel is set to accept any value. So now just to emphasize what that looks like, let's just go to a blank worksheet here. And we had a couple different types of validation that we were doing. So we had one that was date, and that we had another one that was, say, status, which we want to spell correctly, status. Okay. So there's a lot of things we could do to make this look more like the survey. So, I could go in and I can turn off the grid lines and I can turn off the headlines and stuff like that. But for now, let's just, we can even do a few things just to make it look a little bit more survey-y, just to get things started. Okay. So by default, this cell that you see right here will accept any value because data validation is built into Excel, but by default, it'll accept any value. So if you wanted to change that default setting to, say, just a date or to just a validation list, we can do that by going to the Data tab in the ribbon, okay, going over to a group of tools called Data Tools. Okay, Data Tools. And you'll see this right here. So it's an icon, but you'll see this icon represents data validation. Okay. And if I click that data validation list, I have an option of circle invalid data, clear validation circles, or create your data validation, which is what I'm going to do. But before I do, I'm going to save the date for a second. I'm going to do the list validation first. So I'm going to click here on my status cell, and I'm going to go to data validation, and I'm going to open this up. So you'll see by default, every cell in Excel will accept any value. So whatever I type, Excel is just going to let me type it in. But I don't have to leave it that way. I could change it. So I could say, hey, look, I only want you to let the customer or the user or whoever's working with this select data from, for example, a list. But while we're in there, let's look at the other options. There's all these different things we can do. So we could restrict the date, right? So you've got to enter in the current date. We could restrict the time. So it's got to be the current time or time within a certain range, right? So we could say between 6 and 10 p.m. You've got text length. You've seen that all the time. Every time you've seen a tweet, right? Like, you've got 120 characters, and outside of that, you can't send a tweet. Same thing here. We could limit the number of characters that you could put in. We've got decimals, right? We've got whole numbers, which we also call integers. And we've even got that any value, which basically is what the default is. The last one is a custom format, which we will do in just a minute when we set up the date. But for now, let's just go with list. There we go. So now when we set up a list data validation, it's going to ask you for the source. Okay. Now there's two different ways you could put the source in. You could reference the source. So if I've got a list of names that I want to appear as my data validation list somewhere inside this Excel worksheet, then I could reference that list. If I don't, then I can just put the list in manually. So I could type first year, second year, third year, and senior. Okay. And by default, once I do that, it's going to automatically create that validation list. Now, before I do that, though, there's two other things I want to show you. So it would be a fool's errand to simply create data validation and not give your user some kind of prompt to explain to them what they need to do, because no one is going to know what they need to do unless you tell them. So you'll see there's an option here called the input message. Now that input message is basically your instructions to your user. This is part of your user experience, because how would a user know what they're supposed to type in a cell unless you tell them? Okay. So that's what the input message is. Now I will put in here for the title, it can be anything you want. The title just appears above whatever the main text is. Please select from a list. And the main text of the input message is going to pop up. So it'll say alert in bold. In just a minute, I'll show you. And then in the input message, it'll say, please select from, we'll say not a list, but how about the list? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and I'll show you what that does. See, note, alert. Please select from the list. And if I click on the list, there's my list. First year, second, third, senior. But we're not done. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this selected. I'm going to jump over to data validation. And the third thing I want to show you, just like I showed you guys in class, is something called the error alert. So the error alert is broken into three styles. So you'll see right here, style, and then you notice there's three. So basically, in the event that somebody enters in invalid data, right? So I want them to select from this list here, but they don't select from the list. They type something else in that's not part of the list. So for example, we want them to say what year they are in college. Instead, they give us their marital status, and it says single or married or complicated, right? So in the event that somebody enters in invalid data, what do we want them to do? Like, what do we want Excel to do if you put invalid data in? And that is chosen by something called a style. And there's three different types of styles. So there's the stop style, the warning style, and the information style. So let's talk about what those are for a second. So the information style and the warning style are very, very similar. So if I select information, it gives me this little icon here, and then it'll give a message. So in the event that somebody puts in invalid data, I can give them a message. So I could say, warning, please select from the list. So if I select from my list, I have no problem. But if I click on the list and I type in single, look at that. I've got a problem. See, and it's giving me the information logo, and it says, please select from a list. So now here's the part that's not super practical about this option here. The problem is if I click OK, it lets me go ahead and put the value in, even though I put invalid data in. So if you use the information style, it will warn you saying, hey, you put in invalid data. But if the user clicks OK, it will let you continue to do it. And the warning style, this one right here, it does the same thing. So if I click OK, and I go over here and say married. Oops. Yep. See, it's giving me the warning. So it's the same thing, except it's giving me like a harsher warning saying, hey, hazard, warning. And it says, do you want to continue? If I click yes, still lets me do it, right? And I put in really invalid data. So not only did I type in married, I typed in married spelled wrong. So it gives me really invalid data. Now, before I show you what the stop style does, let me show you one other cool thing about data validation. So in the event that you do have invalid data in your data set and you've got data validation set up, Excel can automatically find that for you. So if I go back to the data tab and I go to the data tools, go to data validation, notice I've got an option that says circle invalid data here. So see what happened? So when I clicked circle invalid data, it looked at the data validation in my data set. It found invalid data and it said, hey, this is bad based on your rules. Okay. So we would go in and we would correct that through some kind of data engineering, which we won't need to do today, but that'll show you what that is. Okay. So now if I go back and I clear my invalid data, I'm back to where I started. Okay. So there's one other thing I want to show you, which is the stop style. So if I change the style, and I need to click my cell here, boop. So if I change it from warning style to stop style, this is really your best bet here. This is the bang for your buck. Because what stop style does is in the event that someone puts in invalid data, it will not let you continue. You can't click yes and put it in. You can't say, oh, I know what I'm doing, just go ahead and do it. It is not going to let you continue until you give it specifically the data that it wants. So if I click OK here, now keep in mind this data was already there. So I'm going to click delete. Now I'm going to type married again. And it warned me, it said, hey, this is invalid data. Please select from the list. If I click retry, it's going to just keep doing it. So there's nothing I can do here, right? Okay. Until I go in and I select from the list. So that's kind of data validation and how it works. Now there's one other thing I want to show you. And in the survey that I started here, I had an option where it said restrict to the current date, right? 3/27/2022. So the way I did that, I'm going to go ahead and select this cell here. And we want to restrict the input of this cell to a specific date. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to jump over to my data validation. And for this particular cell, instead of it being any value, I'm going to restrict it to a date. And when I do that, I'm going to change it from between, because I have all these options, right? So note, I've got integer, I've got whole number and integer are the same thing. So I've got integer and I've got floating points, I've got list and date and time. So if I go to date, the next thing it's going to ask me is, do I want to do between two dates? Well, actually I don't. I want today's specific date, right? So I'm going to change that to equal to, like so. Okay. So now from there, what do I do, right? Like, how do I make a worksheet that tells me, okay, I want today's date specifically? Well, the way I do that, because I won't know what the date is when they open this is, I'm going to type the today function like so, and I'm going to put that in as my input. So now when I click here, if I put in 3/22/2022, it's going to give me invalid. If I put in 3/27/2022, which I think is today's date, it takes it. Okay. So that's it. Data validation in a nutshell. It's really easy. I'll give you a couple hints really quickly. You can actually copy and paste data validation. So if you don't want to repeat the same thing over and over again, right? So if I've got multiple cells, so here, let me turn the cells on so you can see them. There you go. So you can see the cells. So notice I've got a cell right here. Okay, like so. And this cell's got data validation in it. So if I wanted that data validation to be somewhere else, I can actually copy and paste just data validation. So if I click the format painter, for example, and then I jump over here and I select a bunch of cells, it looks like it didn't do anything. Oh, well, looks like I didn't actually copy it. Hold on. Copy. There we go. So if I go over to another cell and I go to paste special, notice that I have an option with paste special that I can just paste validation. So now if I do that, looks like nothing happened, but now if I type in, I copied that data validation. And you can do it with the format painter as well. So I can grab this and do a bunch of them all at once. But it's a nifty little trick. If you need to repeat the data validation multiple times, give you a little hint, you probably need to do that on the test tomorrow. So if you're watching this video, good for you. Outside of that, thank you for popping in. Data validation is actually really, really easy. It's a really powerful tool. Good luck tomorrow, friends. And if you're just watching this video for the sake of learning data validations, thank you for popping in. Click like and subscribe like all those young people do, because it makes me feel like I've actually done something to help people, and it's kind of what we're all about. That's the Butler way, right? So good luck, friends, and I will talk to you soon.